Well, we're on chapter 4, still of Deuteronomy. Remember, that was a very important chapter, one that we are instructed to study because it has applications for the last days as well as for their time. And we're going to look at verse 27. We kind of stopped in the middle of, maybe I should start with 26 just to catch the train of thought. I call heaven and earth to witness against you this day, that ye shall soon perish, utterly perish, from off the land whereunto ye go over Jordan to possess it. Ye shall not prolong your days upon it, but shall utterly be destroyed. Now, that's a reference to the verse 25, which we studied last time, that if they fall into idolatry, like the people that were living in Canaan, if they fall into idolatry, that they will disappear quickly. It took the heathen a long time to disappear, but God's people, if they go into idolatry, they disappear fast. And that's basically the message that he's giving to them. Now, today, there's far more idolatry than what anybody is talking about. There's lots of idolatry. Because the definition of an idolater is someone who is, this is the bottom line definition, someone who has got something else more important to them than their relationship with Jesus. So it can be anything. Doesn't matter. It can be, for different people, it's different things. But if it's more important than Jesus, and the second thing, a part of the definition is, if it diminishes our love for Jesus, it's an idol. So there's an awful lot of idols. I gave a talk last Friday night at Wildwood on sports, because sports is one of the greatest idols of our time. And really, the expense that is spent on building sports stadiums for people to go. And I found this article on the internet in which a psychologist was explaining that sports is a replacement for worship, and that the fans worship the game, and they worship those that are playing the game. And so, there's lots of idols. Just look at what people are spending a large amounts of money on, and you know what the idols are. Yes?
They pray there too. Do both teams pray to the same God?
That they can win, I guess. Yeah. So, God is warning us here in chapter 4. He's saying, if Seventh-day Adventists fall into idolatry, trouble is ahead.
It's not easy to pull back out of.
No, that's true. Because an idol turns you on, But Jesus wants him to be the only one that turns us on, not these other things. So, 26, he's warning them. In 27, he continues the warning. He says, and the Lord shall scatter you among the nations, and ye shall be left few in number among the heathen, whither the Lord shall lead you. So, that was repeated in their history over and over again. They got scattered among all the nations, and finally, the 10 tribes were scattered for the last time. They never came back again. And then, finally, after Jesus visited the earth and was rejected, then the 2 tribes scattered and never have been able really to get back together. I mean, they got a little foothold over there in Israel, but it's not much. If it wasn't for the United States, they wouldn't be there. Then it says in 28, and there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands, wood and stone, which neither see, nor hear, nor eat, nor smell. So God says, all those gods, they have no life. But you're going to waste away your life serving those gods. They can't really do anything for you. They can't listen to you. They can't tell you anything. There's nothing they can do for you, and yet people worship them because they feel like they are going to be benefited. And you know, the mind is such that if we think we're going to be benefited, we will. You know, I saw a study on doctors' offices, and if all the people that work for the doctor are willing to say that the doctor is a tremendous doctor, that he just really helps people that come to him, then all of his patients believe that he's a wonderful doctor. But if some of the help give you a bad idea about this doctor, people don't have the same confidence, and they don't even get the same result. Isn't that amazing? It's because the power of the mind. Yes.
Someone has said that 80% of the people that come through the door would get well on their own.
Yeah, that's true. That's true. They wouldn't even need to go to the doctor. Then verse 29, and we're going to study a little more on verse 29. And there ye shall serve gods, the work of men's hands. I mean, what kind of a God is the result of what we do? That God is no more powerful than we are. In fact, he's less powerful because we made him. And it's so foolish to get involved in gods. Then it says, thou shalt, but if from thence, verse 29, but if from thence thou shalt seek the Lord thy God, thou shalt find him. In other words, they wake up and they see this God can't do anything for me. I'm going to go back and serve the true God. And God tells them ahead of time, I will help you. It says, if thou seek him with all thy heart and with all thy soul. What an amazing God that doesn't turn around. You know, when people's marriage breaks up and one feels thrown aside because the other one got involved with another person, and then they come back and say, no, I want to be with you after all. There's many that say, forget it. I'm not going to take you back. You got involved with them, and I don't want you anymore. What if God was like that? But he promises ahead of time that if you wake up to the fact that those idols can't help you any, and you want to come back to me, I'll take you back. But you've got to search for me with all your heart. You can't say, well, I want that idol and I want God too. You got to say it's all for him and nothing for the idol anymore. In 2 Chronicles chapter 7, verses 12 through 14, we have another reference that ties in with this one in Deuteronomy 4. 2 Chronicles 7. 2 Chronicles 7, verses 12 to 14. And the Lord appeared to Solomon by night and said unto him, I have heard thy prayer, and have chosen this place to myself for an house of sacrifice. He says, if I shut up heaven that there be no rain. You know, I've wondered if that isn't what's going on here in our part of the world this year. I mean, it hasn't rained for a long time. Things are so dry. Trees are dying. It's so dry. And we have a water ban down where we are. So, you know, you're not supposed to water your garden or certainly your lawn. If I shut up heaven and there be no rain, or if I command the locusts to devour the land, or if I send pestilence among my people, if my people which are called by my name shall humble themselves and pray and seek my face and turn from their wicked ways, then will I hear from heaven and will forgive their sin and will heal their land. So it'll start raining again. Now, there's no chance for us to receive healing because the majority are breaking the Sabbath commandment every Sunday. And so, you know, it's not going to happen. It's not going to be healed. But when it was the Israelites and they had their own land, which we don't have now, if they wandered away from God, one of the signs is that it stops raining. And when they turn to God, it will start raining again. And he promised ahead of time, if you wake up, then I will make it start raining again. In 1 Kings, I wanted to say this too. You know, I hear the evangelicals talking a lot about this promise. They have made this promise very popular in the Christian world today.
Yes, you hear it all the time.
Yeah, you do. But they cannot receive the answer to their prayers unless they turn to obedience to God. They're wasting their effort to think that God is going to heal America. It's a waste of their effort unless the Christians would start turning to Sabbath keeping. Then there might be a chance that, you know, the healing could take place. 1 Kings chapter 8, verses 33 and 34 also mentions this. You can see that God, in several places, he wanted his people to realize, I am very sad you wandered away from me, but if you want to come back, I will accept you. And probably the greatest book in the Bible that gives that lesson is Hosea. I mean, what an amazing book that the prophet was asked to live out as a parable, live out the way God was with his people. When thy people, Israel, be smitten down before the enemy, now they wouldn't have been smitten down if they'd been obedient, because they have sinned against thee, and shall turn again to thee, and confess thy name, and pray, and make supplication unto thee in this house, then hear thou in heaven, and forgive the sin of thy people Israel, and bring them again unto the land which thou gavest unto their fathers. So we see here that God is very merciful. He's very loving, even though he is pained worse than when a husband commits adultery against his wife or the wife against her husband. He's pained worse than any of us would be pained. But he says, if you wake up and you realize that you're not better off and you want to come back to me, I'll take you back. And if you will return to me, I will give you the blessings that you used to have. And that, of course, is part of our message. You know, the privilege we have is to help people who have been serious sinners to realize that they can go back to God. Whether they never were with him or whether they drifted away from him, we can always offer that for them to come back, and he will accept them again. Okay, reading on a little bit more in verse 30, back in chapter 4. It says, when thou art in tribulation, and all these things are come upon thee, even in the latter days. So, even down during the life of Jesus, and even, well, I'm not sure afterwards. Some of the things I read, I think it was too late after they killed Jesus for their nation to be turned around. But up until they killed Jesus, the latter days, it says here, all these things are come upon thee, even in the latter days, if thou turn to the Lord thy God, and shalt be obedient unto his voice. So if they had said, we've been wanting to kill Jesus, but he is the Messiah, and we are so sorry that we tried to make his life so miserable, and had turned back to him, God would have accepted him back again. Isn't that amazing? But of course they didn't do it. Verse 31 explains why God would do such a thing. For the Lord thy God is a merciful God. He will not forsake thee. See, we might stray away from him, but he will never abandon us. He will never give us up. He will not forsake thee, neither destroy thee, nor forget the covenant of thy fathers, which he sware unto them. That was the covenant that was made with Abraham.
Looking first.
Yeah, several times God renewed his covenant with Abraham. And I believe the covenant was made with Adam, but it's not very well explained in Genesis about the covenant. And yet Genesis 3:15, the essence of that verse indicates that it had to be a covenant that he made with him. And it was called the everlasting covenant. It's identical to the new covenant. You see, as far as human history is concerned, the new covenant was made before the old covenant. You might wonder why it was called the old covenant if it was made later. The reason is that a covenant is based on when it is ratified. And the old covenant was ratified at Sinai, and the new covenant was ratified at Calvary. So that's why it's called the new covenant, but it's identical to the everlasting covenant, which was made in Genesis. So that's a fact that I think very few Seventh-day Adventists understand. But we should understand it. Okay, verse 32. For ask now of the days that are past, which were before thee, since the day that God created man upon the earth, and ask from one side of heaven unto the other, whether there hath been any such thing as this great thing is, or hath been heard like it. And maybe we better read verse 33. Did ever people hear the voice of God speaking out of the midst of the fire, as thou hast heard, and live? That's obviously talking about Mount Sinai. So, yes.
It's interesting though, because God spoke to Moses at the burning bush. And they hallowed him as this important dude. And yet God gave every one of those Israelites the same experience.
Well, actually a bigger experience.
Yes. And I mean, it's interesting that he was really giving each one of them an opportunity to be that close to him.
Yep.
And they turned it down.
Yeah. They were too scared.
I mean, they were going to be a kingdom of kings and priests, all of them.
Mm-hmm.
It seems like the only reason why there were Levites as opposed to the rest of them was because they turned against him.
Yeah.
Otherwise, you'd have seen them with the 12 cycles coming out of the 12 tribes.
Mm-hmm. Yeah, that's a good point. Now this, he's trying to help them understand why they should never go after any other god. He's pointing them back to Sinai. And notice this from Patriarchs and Prophets, page 340. It says, never since man was created had there been witnessed such a manifestation of divine power as when the law was proclaimed from Sinai. So, you could go all the way back from this point. And remember, this book was given in a series of discourses within a 1-month period just before Moses died. When he finished speaking this book, he went up and died. So, this experience of Mount Sinai is being used by God here through Moses to help them never go after any other god, because there were so many things that happened. And it tells some of them here, amid the most terrific convulsions of nature, the voice of God like a trumpet was heard from the cloud. The mountain was shaken from base to summit. So there was an earthquake, and it shook that whole mountain. And the hosts of Israel, pale and trembling with terror, lay upon their faces upon the earth. So they were so scared they didn't even try to stand up or sit down. They just were flat on the ground. I guess that's a natural instinct when a terrible storm comes. And so God is reminding them here through Moses, is there anybody else that ever did that? Is there any other God that could do that? Absolutely not. I'm the only one.
He said to Job, can you thunder like I can?
Yeah, that's right. It didn't last a long time, that's true, but it was scary enough to stay in their mind for quite a while. Of course, now Moses was telling the next generation, except for Caleb, Joshua, and Moses, that first generation are all dead, that saw that at least the ones over 20 were dead. Some of the children were still alive, but he wanted to make sure the next generation were aware of this. Then in verse 34, God asks him another question. He says, or hath God essayed to go and take him a nation from the midst of another nation? When a nation has a bunch of slaves, is there any God that could get them out of that situation? Of course not. Only the God of heaven could do it. By temptations, that in the margin is translated trials. I think that's probably better, although every trial is a temptation. By temptations, by signs, and by wonders, and by war, and by a mighty hand, and by a stretched out arm, and by great terrors, according to all that the Lord your God did for you in Egypt before your eyes. Now you might wonder about the war, but he's probably talking about crossing the Red Sea, that if God hadn't killed that whole army, they would have been captured and taken back again. Verse 35, unto thee it was showed that thou mightest know that the Lord, He is God. There is none else besides Him. Now, this has been put here so that we can understand nothing else can help us like God can help us. Money is not the solution to help us. Power, things, they're not the answer to helping us. God is the answer. He is the one that can do whatever needs to be done. And no matter how impossible the situation looks, He is able to deliver. And sometimes He allows us to get in some pretty difficult circumstances. But He's able to deliver. He's just giving us the opportunity to trust Him. And He doesn't always deliver us from the circumstance. But when He doesn't, then He gives us strength to go through it and to bear it. So it will still be a blessing to us. But there's no other God that can do that, you know. When you have some other God, you go through it alone. You don't have help. And He's trying to help us. And I've just started a radio program. I talked to our church about the idea of doing a radio program. The Holy Spirit, I felt, had been impressing me. And so I thought, well, the final test will be if the church will support it. So I asked for some pledges, and enough pledges came in to start this radio program. And it's 3 mornings a week, Monday, Wednesday, and Friday, at 10 o'clock on WFLI, and it's 1070 on the AM dial. And what I'm doing is a verse-by-verse study, just like I'm doing with you here, although I won't use Spirit of Prophecy with them. But I started in Genesis 1:1, and we had 2 this week, Wednesday and Friday, and next week there'll be 3. So one of the things that ties in with what we're studying from that is that the big issue in the beginning of the Bible is I am the Creator. And I pulled a few texts to show them that all through the Bible, He is talked about as a Creator. So you can't throw away Genesis 1 and say it didn't happen, because you got to reject the whole Bible if you're going to reject creation, because it's everywhere throughout the Bible. He is saying, just like He's saying here, there's no other God that can create, and I create out of nothing. I don't have to have anything to make something. I create out of nothing. So a God that can create out of nothing can solve any problem that He sees as best for Him to solve. Isn't that right? And therefore we can have complete trust in Him. And then on top of that, we have Mount Sinai experience to try to help us realize, as we read the accounts, there's no other God that can make those kind of things happen.
And also tell the end from the beginning.
Yeah, that's right. Did you know that Satan tries to tell the future?
Sometimes he does.
But you know how accurate he is? They've done some analysis of these people that so-called can talk with the dead, which obviously is, talking with Satan and his angels. And apparently for a period of time, the CIA was doing this, because I saw a little news note in the news magazine quite a few years ago that they were going to quit. And there's another practice that the devil's involved in, and that's water witching. Well, both of these activities, what they discovered after looking into it is that they only work 10 to 25% of the time. So the devil is a pretty good guesser as far as guessing is concerned. But since he's not God, he doesn't do very well. But when God predicts the future, 100% of the time it happens. So, there's lots of reasons why we are to have total confidence and not serve anything else but him. Okay, verse 36. It's continuing to recount what happened there at Mount Sinai. Out of heaven he made thee to hear his voice, that he might instruct thee. And upon earth he showed thee his great fire. Now, not only was that mountain shaking like an earthquake, but it was like it was a furnace at the same time. And the fire was going up into heaven. Who knows how far up the fire was going. And thou heardest his words out of the midst of the fire. So the burning bush was an example of Mount Sinai, that God can be in this huge fire and not be burned. Yes.
In Hebrews, 12:29, it says that the Lord is an ever-consuming fire, and we had that tonight here.
Mm-hmm.
So I was under the understanding that God is brilliant, bright. That's why with creation, the first, it says, let there be light, but the light that was there was of God, right? Because the sun wasn't created until Wednesday,
Yeah.
the third day.
Yeah.
So, I don't have any nailed down, but it has to be his power,
Mm-hmm.
of his presence. Wasn't Christ asked a question of being the Son of God, and he told was he like the Father? He said, "You see me." I think it was Philip. "You see me,
Right.
you've seen the Father." So,
Right.
but that was in human form. But I think Christ in his divinity is the same thing. And we don't even see the Holy Spirit. So
Mm-hmm.
would it be a massive, bright heat? He says that he's an ever-consuming fire. I
Yeah.
don't think that the wood and stones were just on fire. I think that it came from God.
Yeah, and it seems like the fire has to do with sin and anything connected with sin. That I don't think in heaven anybody's going to feel like they're on fire,
No.
But whenever he interacts with human beings, that's what happens.
But we're told that in the new city, will it be 7 times brighter than
Mm-hmm.
what we have now. So,
Yeah.
and that's not from an orb that's shining, that's from God himself.
That's right.
So,
Yeah.
just trying to understand. Sorry to interrupt.
That's all right. Okay, verse 37, and because he loved thy fathers, therefore he chose their seed after them, and brought thee out in his sight with his mighty power out of Egypt. Now this is an interesting one that reoccurs a number of times in the Bible. Abraham was a true man of God. He was a converted man. He was an obedient man. He made his mistakes, but he was a true man of God. Jacob also, I think he wasn't converted till he ran away from home, but he got converted, and God promised to these two men wonderful things. And here God is saying, you don't deserve these wonderful things because you're not very obedient, but I am going to keep my promise to Abraham. I'm going to keep my promise to Jacob. and this is why you can have all these blessings. So he reminds them of that periodically. It's not because of you. Verse 38, to drive out nations from before thee, greater and mightier than thou art. So that's a promise still for the future, although they've already conquered. By the time Moses speaks this, they've already conquered 2 nations of giants. And so it's, they should be able to believe that God has the power to finish the job. To drive out nations from before thee, greater and mightier than thou art. And then on the other hand, to bring thee in, to give thee their land for an inheritance as it is this day. So he's saying, you don't have a chance to win the war against these people. I'm doing it. I'm the one that's destroying these nations, and I'm the one that's bringing you in to have their land. You're going to have houses that you didn't build. You're going to have vineyards you didn't plant. You're going to have cities that you didn't build. I'm doing all this for you. Now, this is what he wants to do for us. I've always seen that the deliverance from Egypt was an illustration of conversion. And when we are converted, it's just as miraculous as it is to get them out of Egypt. Second, when they go into the land of Canaan, that's sanctification. We are justified by the power of God. We are sanctified by the power of God. The only people that won't have it happen are those that don't trust God to make it happen. He is capable of making everything happen that needs to happen. Now, he doesn't do it without us, and he doesn't do it if we don't want it. But if we can be brought to the point where we want it, he can do it. So, these promises that talk about the victory in the land of Canaan are promises that you and I can gain the victory over every sin. We can rise above everything and be fully sanctified. Then, maybe we better stop with that. I see the clock has hit 8. So the next time we study Deuteronomy, which won't be next week, but we'll start with verse 40. But here you can see some wonderful promises in what we've gone over tonight. But if they don't serve him, then of course you don't get the promises. That's the message he's trying to make very clear. His desire is to bless, but he can't bless disobedience. He can't bless people that are serving other gods, but he will bless all those that if they come back to him, he will give them all the blessings that he wants to give or can give.